Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're exploring something that really affects anyone looking at the car market, used cars. Specifically, we're digging into the, well, sometimes surprising differences between electric vehicles, EVs, and your traditional petrol or diesel cars, the ICE ones. Our mission here in this deep dive is to sort of get behind the headlines, uncover the real story about how they lose value, how long they last, and, their actual long-term worth. We've got some solid data to look at.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is how it challenges a lot of the usual assumptions people have about buying cars. This deep dive should give you some really crucial insights, hopefully, if you're trying to make a smart decision about your next vehicle. It's about looking beyond just the sticker price or, those first couple years.
Okay, so let's jump right in then. The first thing that really leaps out from the sources is that big difference right at the start. How much value EVs lose early on. The numbers are pretty stark, actually. In just the first 3 years, an electric car can lose up to a whopping 50% of what it originally cost. 50%. It's definitely a figure that makes you pause. And this steeper drop for EVs initially, it's a clear trend in the data we looked at. It kind of reflects a market that's still evolving fast, doesn't it? New battery tech keeps coming out. And maybe buyers are still getting their heads around the long-term picture for EVs. It creates a specific situation in that early used market.
Right. And when you put that 50% for EVs next to the ICE cars, the contrast is really noticeable. Our sources show that, on average, a traditional car, petrol or diesel, it loses more like 35% over those same first 3 years. So yeah, right off the bat, there's like a 15 percentage point difference. It's significant. And this pattern, EVs losing value faster, it does slow down a bit, but it seems to generally stay more pronounced for maybe up to 6 years compared to ICE vehicles. But like you said, that's only the beginning of the story, isn't it?
Exactly. That early depreciation, it's definitely something you need to factor in if you buy a new EV thinking you might sell it pretty quickly within those first few years.
Yeah.
But it's really not the whole picture when you look at the used market overall. Things start to shift quite dramatically, actually, as these cars get older.
Okay, so that's the turning point then. We've talked about those first, say, 6 years where maybe the ICE car holds up a bit better value-wise. But what actually happens to the value, maybe more importantly, the usability of these cars later on, beyond that 6-year mark?
Yeah, this is precisely where the data we've gathered shows the tables really start to turn, and quite significantly, in favor of the electric vehicles in the secondhand market. Once you get past that initial phase, several long-term advantages for EVs just become, much more obvious, and they really impact their value and how appealing they are.
Okay, tell us more. A complete reversal sounds pretty dramatic.
It really is compelling. One of the biggest factors, especially if you live in or near a city, is something we could call circulation freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Think about an ICE car that's getting on a bit, maybe past 6 years old. Many of them, especially those built to older emission standards like, Euro 6 or even looking ahead to Euro 7, they're starting to face real restrictions in big city centers. You might plan a drive into town and suddenly find your car can't go into certain zones or only at certain times or maybe not at all.
Wow, so the car might run perfectly fine, but you're legally blocked from using it where you need to? That's a huge deal for city life.
Exactly. For someone buying a used car who lives or works in a city, that's a massive factor to consider. EVs, on the other hand, they don't face those kinds of limits. They can drive anywhere, anytime. That gives them a clear and frankly growing advantage in terms of just basic usability day to day, especially as more cities bring in stricter rules. And this isn't some far-off future thing. It's happening right now in lots of places.
Okay, that's a really powerful point about long-term convenience. But what about keeping the car running? Maintenance costs can be a killer.
You've hit on another really critical point. Maintenance is probably one of the most convincing long-term pluses for EVs. Electric cars just have way fewer moving parts compared to an internal combustion engine car. Think about a normal engine, hundreds of bits, the gearbox, the exhaust system, all that complexity. It's just not there in an EV. And that directly means less maintenance is needed, fewer things that can actually break over time. It's fundamentally simpler mechanically. So for a secondhand buyer, that usually translates to fewer surprise garage bills and just more predictable running costs. Our data really backs this up. Lower maintenance is key.
So we're talking about skipping things like regular oil changes, new spark plugs, timing belts, the stuff that's just routine for ICE cars. That sounds like a big saving over time. But hang on, what about brakes? EVs still have brakes, right? They must wear out eventually.
They do have brakes, yes. But here's another, quite surprising difference. It's because of regenerative braking. When an EV slows down, the motor basically works in reverse, acting like a generator. It captures some of that slowing down energy and puts it back in the battery. What this means is the actual physical brakes, the pads and discs, they get used much less often than in a regular car. Our sources consistently show it's actually common for EVs to still have their original brakes in good shape, even after, say, 100,000, maybe even 200,000 kilometers. That's around 60,000 to 120,000 miles.
Seriously, that's incredible longevity for brakes.
It really is. It's a component that often needs replacing fairly regularly on an ICE car, so that's another significant saving for the used EV owner.
Okay, this paints a really stark contrast then. Our sources seem to suggest, a 10-year-old ICE car might be seen as getting kind of old and obsolete, lots of parts potentially needing replacement, whereas a 10-year-old EV, it sort of remains new and efficient. You can still drive it anywhere. And like you said, no moving parts to replace in the same way. So what does all this really mean for someone looking at a used car, especially thinking back to that higher initial depreciation for the EV?
Well, if we tie all these threads together, looking at the bigger picture, it genuinely starts to redefine what convenience and overall value actually mean in the used market. Yes, that initial depreciation hit for EVs can be steeper, that's true, but it's only one part of the whole financial story. The fact that you don't have those city driving restrictions later on, the significantly lower maintenance needs, the longer life of components like those brakes, it all adds up to a different kind of convenience, a different kind of cost effectiveness for the person buying secondhand. And arguably, it's a more compelling kind over the long haul.
So you're saying the higher price drop early on for an EV might actually be balanced out or even outweighed by these long-term benefits. It's more like a strategic decision than just buying the cheapest option up front.
Precisely. For anyone looking at buying used, a huge chunk of the total cost isn't just the purchase price. It's what it costs to run and maintain it over the years you own it. And, crucially, how long it stays practical and usable for you. When you factor in fewer trips to the mechanic, those incredibly long-lasting brakes, and the freedom to drive anywhere without worrying about restrictions, that initial depreciation on the EV starts to look less like just a loss. It looks maybe more like an upfront investment in lower running costs and longer usability later. It positions the used EV as a really remarkably sound choice if your priority is ease of use, much lower running cost, and keeping the car useful for many years. The data we looked at really shows that when you consider the whole life of the car, the electric option starts to look like a far more convenient and, yes, economical long-term bet in the used market.
That really does change how you might think about long-term car value. It's like two completely different paths for used EVs and ICE cars. One starts with a steeper financial drop but offers long-term practicality. The other holds value better initially but faces growing limitations later on. It definitely makes you think more carefully when choosing your next car, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It prompts the question, really. When you're looking at a used car, how much importance do you put on that initial price versus its long-term freedom to go anywhere, its likely maintenance bills down the line, and its overall lifespan? The numbers from our deep dive suggest, well, maybe a fascinating reevaluation is needed. We certainly hope this discussion has given you some powerful new things to think about for your next vehicle purchase. And hey, if you found this helpful or just interesting, please do consider hitting that like button and maybe subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the topics that affect you.